Asmara felt the cold iron of the balcony railing pressing into her spine. She was trapped. Above her, the velvet sky of the estate was vast and indifferent, while in front of her, the air was thick with the suffocating scent of her brother's expensive cologne and the sharp, metallic tang of his desperation. "Please, Marcus, just let me go inside," she whispered. She hated the tremor in her voice, the way it betrayed the calm, confident mask she had spent years perfecting. Marcus Quinn didn't move. Instead, he stepped closer, his shadow swallowing her whole. "You don't get it, Azzy," he hissed, his fingers digging into her forearms with a strength that promised bruises. "Father already shook hands on the deal. You're the collateral. You signed the inheritance waiver tonight, or you walk down that aisle next month to a man who will treat you much worse than I am right now." Asmara's breath hitched. Through the glass doors of the gala, she could see the glittering elite of the city sipping champagne, oblivious to the fact that a daughter of the Quinn dynasty was being dismantled in the dark. "You're going to do what?" Marcus taunted, his face inches from hers. "Scream? Tell the board of directors that your own brother is looking out for the family legacy? They'll say you're hysterical. They'll say you're ungrateful for everything this name has given you." He reached for the silk of her white blouse, his hand moving toward the hidden pocket where she kept her phone, his intent to isolate her reaching a fever pitch. Asmara's eyes closed tight, her heart hammering against her ribs like a bird hitting the bars of a cage. She waited for the rough tug, for the final surrender of her dignity. But the air changed. It wasn't a loud crash or a dramatic shout. It was a sudden, heavy silence that seemed to suck the oxygen right out of the night. The temperature on the balcony dropped 10 degrees in a heartbeat. "Touch her again," a voice commanded. It was deep, smooth, and possessed an underlying vibration of such absolute violence that both Asmara and Marcus froze mid-breath. The voice was followed by the unmistakable, heavy metallic slide of a firearm being readied. "And I will end your bloodline right here on this marble," the voice finished. Asmara's eyes snapped open. Standing just behind Marcus was a shadow that had finally taken form. It was Hyun-woo. For 3 months, he had been the silent ghost in her peripheral vision. Her father had hired him as her bodyguard, a man of few words and even fewer expressions. She had grown used to his presence. The lean, athletic build always wrapped in a black suit, the intense dark eyes that seemed to see through walls. He was supposed to be the help. He was supposed to be a tool. But the man standing there now was not a servant. Hyun-woo stepped into the dim light of the balcony. His jet-black hair was slicked back, though a few stray strands fell over his forehead, giving him a look of lethal elegance. His expression was stern, his jaw set in a line of pure, unadulterated threat. He didn't look like a bodyguard protecting a client. He looked like a predator reclaiming his prize. Marcus spun around, his face pale. "What do you think you're doing? I pay your salary, you piece of—" He never finished the sentence. In a blur of motion, Hyun-woo's hand moved. He didn't use the gun. Instead, he reached out and placed a large, calloused hand firmly on the back of Asmara's neck. It was a possessive, dominant gesture that pulled her flush against his side, shielding her from her brother's reach. "You don't pay me enough to watch you breathe the same air as her," Hyun-woo said, his dark eyes boring into Marcus with a terrifying intensity. Asmara looked up at him, her chest heaving. She saw the angular sharpness of his face, the fair skin tight over his cheekbones, and the way his thumb traced the line of her jaw with a strange, dark reverence. This was the man who had followed her to coffee shops and board meetings, never speaking, never intruding. Now, he was declaring war on the most powerful family in the country. Before we go further, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you want to see more of this. It means the world to me, and don't forget to tell me in the comments section where you are watching from. Asmara was 25 years old. She had spent her entire life navigating the treacherous waters of the Quinn household, learning to hide her deep brown, glowing skin behind elegant clothes and her sharp mind behind a submissive smile. She had thought she was playing a long game of survival. But as Hyun-woo's grip tightened on her, a chilling realization washed over her. The bodyguard wasn't just a shield. He was a wolf who had been sitting at her father's table, waiting for the right moment to bite. "I'm taking her now," Hyun-woo stated, not to Asmara, but to her brother. "And if any member of this family tries to follow, I'll stop acting like a bodyguard and start acting like myself." He began to lead her away, his hand never leaving her neck. Asmara felt the world tilting. She was leaving the cruelty she knew for a man who looked like he could burn the world down just to see her smile in the embers. The heavy glass doors of the gala swung open with a muffled thud, swallowing the sounds of the string quartet and the hollow laughter of the city's elite. Hyun-woo didn't slow his pace, his hand still anchored firmly to the nape of Asmara's neck. It was a grip that felt like both a shackle and a lifeline. Asmara stumbled slightly, her silk heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor of the grand foyer, but Hyun-woo's arm was an unyielding pillar of strength at her side, keeping her upright. "Woo, get back here," her father's voice boomed from the top of the staircase. Arthur Quinn appeared at the railing, his face a mottled shade of purple, his eyes bulging with the realization that his control was slipping. "That is my daughter. You are a hired hand, a nobody. I will have you blacklisted from every security firm from here to Seoul." Hyun-woo didn't even glance back. The air around him seemed to vibrate with a cold, focused energy that made the attending valets and security guards step aside instinctively. He reached the massive mahogany front doors and pushed through them, pulling Asmara into the humid night air. A sleek, matte black sedan was already idling at the curb, its headlights cutting through the mist like the eyes of a predator. Asmara's heart hammered against her ribs as she looked from the car to the man beside her. "Hyun-woo, stop," she breathed, her voice finally finding its strength. "My father, he'll call the police. He'll say you kidnapped me." Hyun-woo stopped at the car door. He finally let his hand slide from her neck, but he didn't move away. Instead, he stepped into her personal space, his tall frame looming over her. The shadow in the suit was no longer just a shadow. In the glow of the streetlights, his features were dangerously sharp. "Let him call them," Hyun-woo said, his voice a low, melodic growl. "The police work for the highest bidder, Asmara. And tonight, your father just lost his standing." He opened the door, gesturing for her to get in. "You spent 25 years being a Quinn. How much has that name actually protected you? When your brother had his hands on you, where was your father's protection then? He was inside, toasted by the very people he's selling you to." Asmara looked back at the looming Quinn estate. To anyone else, it was a palace of dreams. To her, it was a mausoleum of her autonomy. She looked at Hyun-woo's hand, large, steady, and scarred across the knuckles. He was a stranger, a man her father had picked to be a watchdog, yet in this moment, he was the only thing standing between her and a life of gilded misery. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice steadying. "Somewhere the Quinn name carries no weight," he replied. As she slid into the cool leather interior of the car, she felt a strange shift in the atmosphere. This silent bodyguard, who had followed her for months without a word, was gone. In his place was someone commanding, someone who moved with the practiced ease of a man used to being obeyed. Hyun-woo closed her door and rounded the car, sliding into the driver's seat with fluid grace. He didn't look at the rearview mirror as Arthur Quinn and his security team spilled out onto the front porch, shouting orders and pointing. Hyun-woo simply shifted the car into gear and floored the accelerator. The engine roared to life, a deep, guttural sound that drowned out her father's rage. As the estate vanished into the darkness behind them, Asmara watched the silhouette of the man beside her. He drove with one hand on the wheel, his expression unreadable, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. For the first time in her life, the path wasn't being dictated by her family's ledger. But as she glanced at the heavy tactical watch on Hyun-woo's wrist and the cold precision of his movements, she realized she hadn't just escaped a prison. She had stepped into the territory of a man who played a much more dangerous game. "You're not just a bodyguard, are you?" she whispered into the quiet of the cabin. Hyun-woo's lips didn't curve into a smile, but his grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly. "I told you, Asmara. I'm going to start acting like myself. You should try doing the same." The city lights of the sprawling estate faded into a blur of dark pines and winding mountain roads. For nearly an hour, the only sound was the low hum of the engine and the rhythmic click of the gear shift. Asmara watched Hyun-woo's profile in the dim glow of the dashboard. He looked different now. The bodyguard mask hadn't just slipped. It had dissolved entirely. The way he held himself wasn't with the stiff deference of an employee, but with the quiet, terrifying ease of a king. They eventually pulled up to a massive gate made of reinforced steel, hidden deep within a forested valley. As the car approached, the gates groaned open without him having to touch a button. Beyond them lay a compound that looked less like a home and more like a fortress. A brutalist masterpiece of glass and concrete perched on the edge of a cliff. "Where are we, Hyun-woo?" Asmara asked, her voice sounding small in the vast silence of the mountains. "Safety," he replied simply. He killed the engine and turned to her, his dark eyes searching her face. "And the only place on this peninsula where your father's name is a punchline, not a threat." He walked around to open her door, his movements fluid and predatory. He led her inside, through a minimalist hall that smelled of expensive leather and ozone. In the center of the main living space, a wall of monitors flickered with data, stock tickers, surveillance feeds, and internal Quinn family documents that Asmara recognized with a jolt of terror. "You've been spying on us," she whispered, walking toward the screens. She saw a balance sheet of her father's offshore accounts. She saw a video feed of the very balcony where they had stood an hour ago. "My father hired you from a top-tier firm. He checked your references. He vetted your entire life." Hyun-woo leaned against a sleek black desk, crossing his arms over his chest. The silk of his shirt strained against his shoulders. "Your father hired exactly who I told him to hire. I created the firm. I wrote the references. I spent 6 months standing 4 paces behind him, watching him trade your future like a commodity, just so I could see exactly how deep the rot in the Quinn family went." Asmara spun around, her heart racing. "Why? Why go to all this trouble for us?" "Not for us, Asmara. For you." He stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the floor until it touched her feet. "I wasn't hired to protect you from the world. I positioned myself there to protect you from them. Your father is a small man with a loud voice, but my family, we are the ones who own the silence he screams into." He reached out, his fingers grazing the sleeve of her white blouse. "The Quinns are a drop of water in an ocean of blood. I watched you navigate that house like a ghost, trying to stay clean in a room full of filth. I didn't take you tonight because I'm a hero, Asmara. I took you because I'm tired of watching what belongs to me be handled by people who don't know your worth." The possessive weight of his words hit her like a physical blow. The man standing before her wasn't a savior. He was a silent predator who had been living in her house, eating at her table, and marking his territory while her family was too arrogant to notice. "You're the heir," she realized, her voice trembling. "The syndicate my father whispers about in the dark." The one he's terrified of. Hyun-woo's lips thinned into a cold, sharp line. He should be. Because I've seen how he treats his most precious asset. And I've decided that the contract is null and void. Asmara stood paralyzed as the silence of the compound seemed to pulse with the weight of Hyun-woo's revelation. The monitors behind her continued their silent, digital dance, casting a flickering blue light over his sharp features. He didn't look like the man who had stood 4 paces behind her father for months. He looked like the architect of the very world her father feared. The Kong-style organization, Asmara whispered, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. In the boardroom, they speak of your family in code. They call you the Invisible Hand. My father said you were a myth used to keep the smaller families in line. Hyun-woo took a slow, deliberate step toward her, his dark eyes never wavering. Men like your father call us myths because the truth is too heavy for them to carry. We don't just keep families in line, Asmara. We own the ground they walk on. And right now, your father is standing on a very thin ledge. He reached for a glass decanter on the desk, pouring a finger of amber liquid with a steady hand. The clinking of the glass was the only sound in the vast room. 20 years ago, before you were old enough to understand the poison in your bloodline, your father made a choice. He wanted the Quinn expansion into the Asian markets to be overnight. He wanted the prestige without the work. So, he went to my father. Asmara felt a chill crawl up her arms. She remembered the stories of her family's sudden, meteoric rise, the way they had moved from a respectable firm to a global dynasty in a single summer. She had always been told it was her father's genius. He didn't borrow money. Hyun-woo continued, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. He borrowed influence. He used our shadow to intimidate his rivals, and in exchange, he signed a blood oath contract. He promised a percentage of the Quinn legacy that he never intended to pay back. He thought distance and time would make us forget. He turned back to her, the intensity in his gaze making it hard for her to breathe. My family never forgets. The debt your father owes isn't just financial. It's existential. By the terms of the original agreement, when the debt reached a certain threshold of interest, the Kong family was entitled to take the most valuable asset the Quinns possessed to settle the score. Asmara's heart stopped. She looked at the way Hyun-woo was watching her, not with the coldness of a debt collector, but with a terrifying, burning possessiveness. Me, she breathed. I'm the asset. He was going to sell you to a political ally to save his own skin, Hyun-woo said, setting the glass down with a sharp thud. He was going to use you to pay a different debt while he still owed us. That's why I'm here. I didn't just watch you for the mission, Asmara. I watched you because I had to know if the girl in the files was worth the war I'm about to start. He moved closer, his hand coming up to hover just inches from her face, the heat from his skin radiating against her cheek. Your family owes a debt they can never pay with money. They can only pay it with you. But I'm not my father. I don't want a signature on a contract. I want the woman who had the courage to look me in the eye when I was just a shadow in a suit. Asmara felt the world tilting. Her entire life, the gala, the dresses, the expectations, had been nothing more than a long-term loan. She looked at Hyun-woo, the heir to a criminal empire, and realized that for the first time in 25 years, someone was telling her the truth, even if that truth was wrapped in a shroud of violence and blood. So, she said, her voice trembling but her eyes remaining fixed on his. What happens now? Hyun-woo's thumb finally made contact with her skin, tracing the line of her lower lip. Now, he whispered, we let your father realize that he no longer has anything left to bargain with. The war has already begun. Asmara looked away from the monitors, her gaze settling on the man who had just dismantled her entire reality. Now that the suit jacket was gone and the pretense of the hired help had been stripped away, Hyun-woo was overwhelming. He stood with a lean, athletic build that suggested a lifetime of disciplined violence, his presence filling the minimalist room until the walls felt like they were closing in. He wasn't just a man. He was a force of nature that her family had foolishly tried to put on a leash. "You're talking about me like I'm a line item on a ledger," Asmara said, her voice regaining its edge despite the way her heart thundered against her ribs. She moved toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the jagged mountain peaks. "My father treated me like property to be sold, and now you're standing here telling me I already belong to you because of a debt I didn't sign for. What's the difference, Hyun-woo? Where's my choice in this?" Hyun-woo didn't answer immediately. She heard the soft tread of his footsteps on the polished floor, the sound of a hunter who never made a mistake. When he stopped, he was directly behind her. He didn't touch her, but she could feel the heat radiating from his body, the sheer magnetic pull of his intense dark eyes as they watched her reflection in the glass. "The difference," he said, his voice a low vibration that seemed to settle in her very bones, "is that your father wanted to use you to hide his weakness. I want you because you are the only thing in that house that was ever strong. I don't want to sell you, Asmara. I want to arm you." He reached out then, not to pull her close, but to rest his hand on the window frame beside her head, effectively pinning her between the glass and his frame. His fingers were long and powerful, the sleeves of his black shirt rolled back to reveal forearms corded with tension. "You've spent 25 years calculating every breath just to survive," he whispered, leaning down until his lips were inches from her ear. "Don't you want to know what it feels like to stop calculating? To know that if anyone even thinks about hurting you, I will burn their world to ash before they can blink." Asmara turned her head, her breath hitching as she met his gaze. Up close, his eyes weren't just dark. They were a bottomless void of focus and intent. It was terrifying, this possessive nature of his protection. It was a golden cage, draped in silk and guarded by a monster. Yet, as she looked at him, she felt a treacherous thrill. For the first time, she wasn't being looked at as a daughter, a sister, or a bridge to a merger. She was being seen. "It's still a cage," she challenged, though her voice lacked its usual bite. "It's a fortress," he corrected, his gaze dropping to her lips for a fleeting, scorched second before returning to her eyes. "And you have the keys. But as long as you are under my shadow, the Quins cannot touch you. No one can. I've declared war on your bloodline for the right to stand at your side. Do you really think I'd let you go back to being a victim?" He moved his hand from the window, his thumb grazing the side of her neck in that same possessive gesture from the balcony. The touch was light, almost reverent, but the underlying dominance was unmistakable. He was claiming her, marking her as off-limits to the rest of the world. Asmara leaned into the touch for a heartbeat before catching herself. She was a Quinn, and she knew that power always came with a price. Hyun-woo was offering her the world, but he was also demanding she exist within his orbit. "I need time," she whispered, her eyes searching his. "I need to know who I am without a master, Hyun-woo. Even a master who promises to burn the world for me." Hyun-woo stepped back, giving her space, but the intensity in his eyes didn't dim. "You have all the time you need, Asmara. But remember, the war doesn't wait. And while you're finding yourself, I'll be the one making sure there's still a world left for you to rule." The morning sun had barely touched the mountain peaks when the tranquility of the compound was shattered. Asmara stood in the center of the command hub, her eyes fixed on the massive screens as a motorcade of black SUVs tore up the winding private road. At the head of the pack was her father's signature Bentley, a vehicle she had once associated with safety, but which now looked like a hearse coming to collect her. Hyun-woo stood by the window, his back to her. He hadn't put his suit jacket back on. He was just in his black silk shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal the corded muscle of his forearms. He looked calm, but the air around him was heavy with the scent of an impending storm. "They're early," he remarked, his voice devoid of surprise. "Your father is more desperate than I calculated. He didn't just bring lawyers, Asmara. He brought a news crew." Asmara felt a cold knot of dread tighten in her chest. Her father didn't just want her back. He wanted to destroy the man who took her. As the SUVs screeched to a halt in the courtyard, her father, Arthur Quinn, stepped out, followed by a flurry of flashbulbs and microphones. He looked older, more frantic, clutching a leather briefcase as if it were a shield. "Come with me," Hyunwoo said, extending a hand. It wasn't an order, but the invitation was laced with the steel of his possessive protection. They stepped out onto the wide stone terrace overlooking the driveway. Below them, Arthur Quinn looked up, his face contorting with a mix of rage and theatrical sorrow for the benefit of the cameras. "Asmara," her father bellowed, his voice amplified by the quiet of the valley. "Get away from that man. Officers, arrest him. This animal kidnapped my daughter from a private event. He's been brainwashing her, holding her against her will." A high-ranking police official stepped forward, hand on his holster, looking up at Hyunwoo with a mixture of duty and hesitation. "Sir, step away from the lady. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of kidnapping and extortion." Asmara felt Hyunwoo's hand settle on the small of her back. The touch was grounding, a silent reminder of the strength he had offered her. She looked down at her father, the man who had been ready to sell her inheritance and her life to the highest bidder just hours ago. "Asmara, darling." Arthur's voice softened, adopting the tone of a doting parent. "I have a check here for $5 million. It's a settlement for this man. If he lets you go now, we won't press full charges. We can go home. We can forget this ever happened." The crowd went silent, waiting for her to run down the stairs. The narrative was perfect, the wealthy heiress rescued from her rogue bodyguard. But Asmara looked at the way Hyunwoo stood, shoulders square, eyes fixed on her father with a lethal, knowing glint. He wasn't afraid. He was waiting for her to realize her own power. Asmara stepped forward, moving to the edge of the terrace so the cameras could see her clearly. She felt the glow of her own skin against the white silk of her blouse, her long hair catching the wind. "My father is lying," she said, her voice clear and carrying across the courtyard. The reporters scrambled to catch her words. "I wasn't kidnapped. I left that gala because I realized the people inside were more dangerous than the man standing behind me." She turned slightly, reaching back to take Hyunwoo's hand, interlacing her fingers with his. They hired hand, and the heiress stood together, a united front against the Quinn dynasty. "Arthur Quinn didn't come here to rescue me," Asmara continued, her gaze locking onto her father's panicked eyes. "He came here to buy back a piece of property he already sold. But I am not for sale. I am staying here, with the only person who had the courage to tell me the truth." Arthur's face turned a violent shade of red. "Asmara, you're throwing away your life for a criminal. He's a monster." "Then I'd rather be with the monster I chose," Asmara replied, "than the one who shared my blood." As the police looked at each other, confused by the public refusal of the victim, Hyunwoo stepped closer to her. He didn't say a word, but the look he gave her was more intimate than any touch. It was the look of a man who had just seen his queen take her first piece on the board. He signaled to his own security team, and the heavy steel gates began to close on the Quinn family, shutting out the flashes of the cameras and the screams of her father. Asmara was no longer a Quinn. She was something else entirely, and the man holding her hand was ready to help her burn the bridges she had just crossed. The silence that followed the closing of the gates was heavier than the chaos that had preceded it. Inside the compound, the air felt thick and still, charged with the lingering electricity of Asmara's public defiance. She stood by the large windows of the study, her hands still trembling slightly as she watched the dust settle on the long driveway. "You did well," Hyunwoo said. His voice was close, too close. She hadn't heard him move, but suddenly he was there, a presence that felt both grounding and overwhelming. Asmara turned to look at him, her chest heaving. "I just destroyed my life, Hyunwoo. I called my father a liar in front of the national press. There's no going back now." "There was never a way back," he replied softly. He was watching her with an intensity that felt like a physical weight, his dark eyes tracing the curve of her jaw as if memorizing it. "You've spent your life being a passenger in your own story. Today, you took the wheel." "But why for you?" she asked, her voice a fragile whisper. "You told me about the debt. You told me about the contract. But you've been standing behind me for months, watching me sleep, watching me work. This isn't just about a business arrangement between our fathers. You're too deep in this, Hyunwoo." "What?" Hyunwoo went quiet, his stern expression flickering for the first time. He walked over to a leather chair, but he didn't sit. Instead, he gripped the back of it until his knuckles turned white. He looked out at the mountains, his jaw tight. 3 years ago, he began, his voice dropping into a low, gravelly register. "My father held a closed-door negotiation at the Quinn headquarters in London. I was there, standing in the shadows, just like I was at the gala. Your father was folding. He was ready to let his employees lose everything just to save a few points on his own margin." Asmara remembered that meeting. She had been a junior analyst then, barely allowed in the room. "Then you spoke," Hyunwoo continued, finally turning to face her. "You were 22. You stood up in a room full of the most dangerous men in 2 hemispheres and told my father, a man who has ordered executions over a dinner table, that his math was wrong. You told him that if he crushed those workers, the long-term instability would cost him more than he'd gain. You were calm. You were brilliant. And you were the first person I'd ever seen look my father in the eye without blinking." Asmara felt the air leave her lungs. "You were there." "I've been there ever since," he admitted, the mask of the bodyguard finally shattering to reveal something much more raw. "It's a pathology, Asmara. My doctors would call it a fixation, an attachment disorder born of a life where everything is transactional. But for me, it was the moment I realized that I didn't want to inherit a throne if it meant I had to live in a world without someone like you in it." He stepped toward her, his movements slow and deliberate. "I didn't just position myself in your house to watch the Quinns. I did it because I couldn't stop watching you. Every book you read, every time you sighed when you thought you were alone, every smile you forced for a family that didn't deserve you. I felt it. I've lived in your shadow for 6 months, waiting for the day I could finally pull you into mine." The possessiveness in his voice was chilling, yet it carried an honesty that her father's love never had. It was a dark, obsessive devotion, a truth that was as terrifying as it was intoxicating. "So I'm not just a debt to be collected," she breathed, looking up into his intense dark eyes. "You are the only thing I have ever wanted that wasn't for sale," he whispered, his hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb stroking her glowing skin with a reverence that felt like a vow. "And now that the world knows you're mine, I'm never letting you go back to the light." The days following Hyunwoo's confession had been a blur of high-tension quiet. Asmara had begun to adjust to the rhythm of the compound, to the way the staff moved like shadows, and to the way Hyunwoo watched her, not as a bodyguard anymore, but as a man who had finally captured the sun. But the peace was fragile, and it shattered with a single, frantic phone call at 3 in the morning. It was her mother's voice, thin and reedy, breathless with a terror that bypassed all of Asmara's carefully constructed defenses. "Asmara, please. I can't breathe. Your father. He's gone, and the house is so quiet. I just need to see you one last time." The line had gone dead before Asmara could even ask where the nurses were. Hyun-woo had been hesitant, his dark eyes narrowing as he listened to the recording. "It's too clean, Asmara. Your mother is his most effective leverage." "She's my mother, Hyun-woo," Asmara had countered, her voice raw. "If there is even a 1% chance she's dying alone in that house, I have to go. You have a dozen men. Take me there. Secure the perimeter. Just let me see her." Against his better judgment, Hyun-woo had agreed. But the moment the black sedan crossed the threshold of the Quinn estate, the air changed. The lights in the grand foyer were dim, and the heavy scent of lilies, the flowers of morning, clung to the walls. "Stay close," Hyun-woo whispered, his hand hovering near the holster concealed by his jacket. They reached the master bedroom, but when Asmara pushed the door open, she didn't find a dying woman. She found her mother sitting perfectly upright in a velvet armchair, her face pale but healthy, flanked by her brother Marcus and a team of private security contractors she didn't recognize. "Mom," Asmara breathed, taking a step forward. "I'm sorry, baby," her mother whispered, refusing to meet her eyes. "He said it was the only way to save the family." "Trap," Hyun-woo roared, reaching for her, but a heavy iron gate dropped from the ceiling, a security measure Asmara hadn't even known existed. It slammed down between them, a wall of reinforced bars separating the bedroom from the hallway. Suddenly, the house was swarming. Red laser dots danced across Hyun-woo's chest as he was forced back by the sheer volume of firepower in the corridor. Through the bars, Asmara saw Marcus step forward with a sneer, holding a remote detonator. The invisible hand shouldn't have walked into a house he didn't own, Marcus mocked. "You're trespassing, Woo. And Asmara is finally home where she belongs." Asmara threw herself against the bars, her fingers clawing at the cold metal. "Hyun-woo, go. Leave me." Hyun-woo ignored the red dots on his chest. He stood perfectly still, his eyes locked onto hers through the iron lattice. This stern, threatening expression she had seen on the balcony was nothing compared to the cold, abyssal rage that settled over his features now. He didn't look like a man who had lost. He looked like a man who was deciding exactly how many people had to die. "You have 5 minutes to open this gate," Hyun-woo said, his voice dropping into a register that made the private contractors visibly flinch. He wasn't speaking to Marcus. He was speaking to the entire Quinn bloodline. "Or what?" Marcus laughed, though it sounded forced. "You're outnumbered and outgunned." Hyun-woo pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumb hovering over a single icon. "Or I stopped playing the role of the silent protector. I've spent months holding back the Kong-style syndicate from swallowing your assets because I didn't want Asmara to see the blood. But if you keep her in that room, I will burn this city until the smoke chokes you out of hiding." He looked at Asmara, his gaze softening for a fraction of a second. "Close your eyes, Asmara. I'm declaring war." He pressed the button, and the power in the entire estate died instantly. In the darkness, the only thing she could hear was the heavy, rhythmic thud of Hyun-woo's boots as he began to move, and the terrifying realization that the man she loved was no longer a bodyguard. He was the monster her family had spent 20 years trying to avoid. The darkness in the Quinn Manor was absolute, but it wasn't silent. Beyond the iron bars of the master suite, the house had become a symphony of tactical precision and muffled violence. Asmara leaned her forehead against the cold metal, her breath coming in shallow gasps as the sounds of her world being dismantled echoed through the corridors. There were no sirens, no shouting, only the rhythmic thud of breaching charges and the sharp, clinical pops of suppressed gunfire. Hyunwoo's syndicate wasn't just attacking, they were erasing. The bedroom door was kicked open, the wood splintering like dry bone. A group of men in tactical gear, their faces obscured by matte black masks, swarmed the room. They didn't speak. They moved with a predatory grace that made her family's private security look like children playing with toys. One of them stepped forward, sliding a heavy electronic bypass into the gate's control panel. With a mechanical groan, the iron bars slid upward. Asmara didn't wait. She ran into the hallway, her white blouse stained with dust and the shadows of the night. She found the house transformed. The opulent paintings had been knocked from the walls, and the protection her father had bragged about lay face down in the plush carpeting. She followed the sound of a struggle to the grand library. Inside, the scene was bathed in the flickering emergency red light of the mansion's backup system. Marcus was on his knees in the center of the room, his face bloodied, his hands bound behind his back. Standing over him, looking like a god of ruin, was Hyunwoo. He hadn't even broken a sweat. His black silk shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and his intense dark eyes were fixed on Marcus with a chilling detachment. In his hand, he held a heavy, silenced pistol, the barrel resting lightly against Marcus's temple. Asmara, tell him. Marcus shrieked, his voice cracking with a cowardice that made her stomach turn. We're family. You can't let this animal do this. Hyunwoo didn't look at Marcus. He looked at Asmara. The stern, threatening expression he usually wore had smoothed out into something much more terrifying, a silent question. He lured you here using your mother's life as a lie, Hyunwoo said, his voice a low, steady vibration in the crimson light. He put you behind bars. He was ready to let his men shoot me while I stood unarmed. He is a cancer in your legacy, Asmara, and I don't leave debt unpaid. He clicked the safety off. The sound was deafening in the quiet room. One word, Hyunwoo whispered, his gaze locked onto hers, offering her the ultimate, dark seduction of power. I can erase him. I can make it so the man who hurt you never existed. Your family's rot ends tonight, and we build something new from the ashes. Do you want him gone? Asmara looked at her brother. She saw the man who had bruised her arms on the balcony, the man who had tried to sell her soul for a profit margin. Then she looked at Hyunwoo, the man who had declared war on the world just to stand in her shadow. She realized then that this was the final test. Choosing Hyunwoo didn't just mean accepting his protection, it meant accepting his darkness. Asmara, please. Marcus sobbed, pressing his forehead to the floor. She walked forward until she was standing directly in front of them. She looked down at her brother, feeling a strange, cold clarity. The mercy she had been raised to show was a weakness her family had exploited for 25 years. But if she let Hyunwoo pull the trigger, she would be bound to his syndicate by blood, not just contract. Death is too quiet for him, Hyunwoo, Asmara said, her voice surprisingly steady. She reached out, her hands settling over Hyunwoo's on the grip of the gun, her deep brown skin a striking contrast against his pale, scarred knuckles. She didn't push the gun away, she simply lowered it. I want him to watch. I want him to stay alive and see us take everything he thought he was entitled to. I want him to be a ghost in the empire we're going to build. Hyunwoo's eyes searched hers, a slow, predatory smile finally tugging at the corner of his mouth. He realized she wasn't choosing mercy for Marcus. She was choosing a more lingering kind of justice for herself. As you wish, my queen, he murmured. He didn't put the gun away, but he handed Marcus over to his men with a flick of his wrist. Take him. Strip the Quinn name from every account, every deed, and every record. By dawn, he belongs to the streets. He turned to Asmara, pulling her flush against his chest, his heart beating a steady, violent rhythm against her own. The night of erasure was over. The reign of the Kong-style syndicate had begun. The skyline of Seoul shimmered across the surface of the Han River, a sprawling tapestry of neon and steel that seemed to bow before the quiet power radiating from the riverbank. 6 months had passed since the night of erasure, and the world that had once known Asmara Quinn as a disposable heiress now whispered her name with a mixture of reverence and fear. She stood on the private observation deck of their riverside penthouse, the wind catching the hem of her silk gown, her deep brown skin glowing under the moonlight like burnished gold. She wasn't looking at the city, but at the reflection of the man standing behind her. Hyun-woo didn't hide in the shadows anymore. He wore the mantle of the Kong-style syndicate with a lethal, effortless grace, but his focus remained singular. He stepped forward, the familiar heat of his presence grounding her, and placed his hand on the back of her neck. It was the same possessive gesture from the balcony, but the context had shifted entirely. It was no longer a claim of ownership, but a recognition of his equal. The final signatures were verified an hour ago, Hyun-woo murmured, his voice a low vibration against her skin. The Quinn holdings have been fully restructured. Your father is in permanent exile, and Marcus, well, Marcus is learning the value of silence in the lower districts. The empire is yours, Asmara. All of it. Asmara leaned back into him, her head resting against his shoulder. She remembered the girl who had once calculated her survival in shallow breaths, terrified of the men who shared her blood. That girl was a ghost now. In her place was a woman who had walked through fire and found that she liked the heat. It's not just mine, Hyun-woo, she said, turning in his arms to face him. She reached up, her fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw and the intense dark eyes that still watched her with a hunger that time hadn't dulled. We built this architecture together. My family had the name, but your darkness gave me the room to breathe. Hyun-woo's grip tightened slightly, his thumb tracing the line of her lip with a dark, reverent focus. I told you once that I'd burn the world to see you smile in the embers. I meant it, but I didn't realize that you'd be the one holding the match. A soft smile touched Asmara's lips, a calm, confident expression that held more power than 1,000 declarations of war. She had traded the legal corruption of her family for the criminal honor of his syndicate, and she had done it with her eyes wide open. She understood now that power wasn't about being safe. It was about being the most dangerous thing in the room. My mother called me yesterday, Asmara said softly. She asked if I was happy. She still thinks I'm a victim of your fixation. She still thinks I'm trapped in a golden cage. And what did you tell her? Hyun-woo asked, his gaze dropping to her lips. I told her that a cage is only a cage if you want to leave, Asmara replied, her voice steady and resonant. I told her that for the first time in my life, I don't have to pretend to be small. I'm a partner in the Kong-style legacy. I'm the queen of the shadows you created. Hyun-woo leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. The man who had been a silent bodyguard, a stalker, and a savior was now simply her match. The war he had declared on her family had ended, but the reign they were starting was just beginning. The world is going to try to test us, Asmara, he whispered. They'll see a beautiful woman and a man with a violent past, and they'll think they find a weakness. Asmara pulled him closer, her hands sliding into his jet-black hair. Let them try. We've already erased the people who shared our blood. The rest of the world won't stand a chance. As they stood together overlooking the Han River, the silence between them was no longer a void, but a foundation. They were two broken pieces of a dark puzzle, finally locked into place. Asmara Quinn was no longer running from the monsters. She had become one, and in the arms of the man who loved her obsession, she had never felt more alive. The city glittered below them, indifferent and beautiful, a kingdom waiting for its new rulers to decide its fate. And as Hyun-woo kissed her, sealing their new reign in the quiet of the night, Asmara knew that she hadn't just survived her story, she had conquered it. The end. Thanks for watching. If you love this, then you'll love what's coming up next. Like, share, and subscribe so that you don't miss any of my story. Check out the channel for more African Korean stories.